The reason for producing this film is that soon the city of Jerusalem will become the focus of world opinion. Jerusalem will become a stumbling block to world peace, eventually a bargaining tool to resolve political issues of such magnitude that it will lead to a catastrophic battle involving the major armies of the world in a nuclear holocaust. Four separate groups currently have an interest in Jerusalem. Firstly, the Jewish people, because of their historical claim. Their belief that as a legally constituted nation, it is their designated capital, because only in Jerusalem can they rebuild the temple, without which their religious worship and vision of God cannot be fulfilled, and finally, that every prophecy relating to their future indicates that their Messiah must return to the rebuilt temple in this place. Secondly, Bible-believing Christians accept the Jewish and biblical prophecies concerning Jerusalem which will be fulfilled. They make no claim to the city except to believe that the Bible says that the Jews will return, rebuild the temple, and that the Jewish Messiah will return to the city when he returns to the earth at his second coming. Therefore, Jerusalem will be, at that time, under Jewish-Israeli control. Thirdly, the Muslims, who believe that it was on the Temple Mount that their father Abraham sacrificed his son Ishmael, that the Prophet Muhammad ascended into heaven from the Temple Mount in the night journey on his winged horse, and that the Dome of the Rock is the third most holy place for the Muslim faith. Fourthly, the Palestinian people, who claim that as the more recent dwellers in the land, Jerusalem is their political capital. Let's look at the brief history of Jerusalem. One of the earliest recorded mentions of the area is in 2050 before Christ, when Abraham was told by God to sacrifice his son on Mount Moriah, today the temple area, and the Dome of the Rock are on this same Mount Moriah. Another record was in 1250 before Christ, when Joshua defeated the king of Jerusalem. Then again in 1005 before Christ, when David was appointed king of Israel after the death of King Saul. The first thing that he did was to march his army to Jerusalem, then occupied by the Jebusites, a Canaanite tribe, where he conquered the fortress of Zion. That's referred to in the first book of Chronicles, chapter 11, verse 4. From this fortress of Zion, David built the walled city, which became called the City of David, and still is today. Shortly after this, because of his sin and the plague which God sent on Israel, God commanded David to buy the land on the top of Mount Moriah, where Abraham had sacrificed his son, for 600 gold shekels, and to make a sacrifice and build the temple there. The Roman invasion in the year 70 before Christ ended Jewish independence in the land. Jerusalem itself was destroyed by the Romans in AD 70. Jewish independence in Israel was re-established in 1948. Despite this long break, the longest period of sovereignty over Jerusalem by any nation belongs to the Jews. Throughout all periods of foreign rule over Jerusalem, beginning with the Romans in 70 before Christ, through Byzantine, Persian, Arab, Crusader, Mamluk, and the Ottoman Turks, ending in 1918, Jews were persecuted, massacred, and subject to exile. In spite of this, the Jewish presence in Jerusalem remained constant and enduring.
Historical facts are that throughout history there have always been Jews in this land, in the Holy Land. Sometimes more, sometimes less, but there has never been a period when there were no Jews in the country. The most interesting fact, I think, is that in Jerusalem itself, since before the mid-19th century, there was a majority of Jews. It was mostly religious Jews. There were many people who came here to study and also to die and to be buried on Mount Olives.
Beside the Jewish people, no other nation or state that gained political sovereignty over the area ever made Jerusalem a capital city. The Arab and Mamluk empires chose to rule from Damascus, while the Ottoman ruler resided in Constantinople. None of these empires even granted Jerusalem the status of district capital.
What happened since the rise of Islam in 622 after Christ is that most of the time it was under Islamic rule. Whatever ruler it was, Umayyad dynasty, Mamluk or Ottoman rule. Almost 200 to 250 years it was not ruled by Islamic rule, be it Christian, Crusades, British Mandate, and just now recently in the last 57 years or 37 years, of course, the Jewish sovereignty, Israel. Now, it is clear to us that whenever Islamic rule was here, Jerusalem was secondary to Arab interests. They dominated it, but they never invested in it. It was never a political central town in any Arab rule. It became almost dear to the Muslims only when it was ruled by Christians or by Jews. And this is a puzzle, a historical puzzle, why Jerusalem is neglected when it is under Islamic rule and why it is so dear to them when it is under another rule.
Let's look at the divisions of the Middle East from 1917 to 1948. 100 years ago, there were no great world powers in the Middle East. Oil had not been discovered in Arabia or Iraq. Jerusalem was a small, slumbering, insignificant town, and the land was considered infertile and worthless. The Middle East is often thought of as the cradle of ancient civilizations, yet few of the region's modern states have existed more than 70 years. The land was simply carved up into artificial entities by Britain and France after the 1914-18 war. The whole Middle East was ruled by the Ottoman Turkish Empire from the 16th century until in 1917, when, during the First World War, because they fought with Germany against Britain, the Turks were driven out and defeated by the Western Allies. After the war, the British assumed responsibility for the largest part under a League of Nations mandate. Iraq. Britain appointed Abdullah Faisal, the Prince of Mecca, as King of Iraq in 1921, and in 1932, Iraq became an independent nation. Syria. After the Ottoman Empire disintegrated, Syria became a French mandate. Following the fall of France in the Second World War, Syria was occupied by the Allies who encouraged it to become independent in 1941. Jordan. Transjordan formed under the British Mandate as the land on the east bank of the River Jordan achieved full independence from Britain in 1946 as the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, with King Abdullah Hussein as king. 2 years later, the British Mandate in Palestine also came to an end, and 5 Arab nations fought Israel for control of the region. A ceasefire was called in 1949, by which time Jordanian forces had occupied what was to become known as the West Bank, as well as Gaza and the Old City of Jerusalem. This territory was annexed to Jordan, but they lost possession of it in the 1967 Six-Day War against Israel. The PLO. Arafat formed the PLO in 1964 to unite Palestinian Arab groups opposed to Jewish existence in the land. After the Arab defeat in the Six-Day War in 1967, control of the PLO devolved to the leadership of various militia groups, the most dominant being Yasser Arafat's Al-Fatah. Fatah means conquest by jihad. In 1969, Arafat became chairman of the PLO, which was recognized by the Arab nations and the United Nations as the representative of all Palestinians. The PLO was based in Jordan, but its aim of establishing a Palestinian state conflicted with Jordan's desire to regain the land it had lost in the Six-Day War. Civil war broke out between the Palestinian guerrillas and the Jordanian army. In 1974, the Jordanian government recognized the PLO and its claim to Gaza, West Bank and Old Jerusalem, but expelled Arafat from Jordan. He went to Lebanon, where, with Lebanese Muslims, he declared jihad on Lebanese Christians, and the bloody civil war lasted 20 years, until 1995. Looking at Israel and the Jews. If you look at the Jewish or Israeli claims to Jerusalem, we must identify a clear difference between Israel as a nation and the Jews as an ethnic, cultural or national identity. The Jews are clearly identified as a separate ethnic or national race. For 4,000 years they have been identified through Abraham and his son Isaac. Then, when Isaac's son Jacob was chosen instead of his older twin brother Esau, and God renamed Jacob as Israel, the father of the nation. So Abraham was the one to whom the land was given. His grandson Jacob was the one whose name was changed by God and became the first mention of the name Israel. Jews are clearly identified throughout history, from their first beginning with Abraham in the land of Canaan, through their emigration into Egypt under Jacob, their return to the promised land of Canaan under Moses, their captivity in Babylon, and their final return under Zerubbabel, until their final dispersal after the destruction of Jerusalem by the Romans. From the time Abraham left that part of the land of Canaan between the Jordan and the Mediterranean, promised to him and his descendants by God, to go into Egypt to escape the famine, until